The Forbidden City. Secrets behind China's hidden palace.
Welcome. Today, I am going to tell you a story that will change everything you thought you knew about power, secrets, and one of the most mysterious places on Earth. You might have heard about the Forbidden City before. Maybe you know it as that massive red palace in Beijing, or perhaps you've seen it in movies, standing there with its golden roofs gleaming in the sun. But today, I am going to tell you the real story, the story that goes beyond the walls, beyond the tourists, beyond what any guidebook can tell you. The Forbidden City is not just a palace, it is a world within a world, a place where emperors were born, lived, and died without ever stepping outside its walls, a place where concubines fought deadly battles for power, a place where eunuchs controlled the fate of an empire, a place so sacred, so secret, that for 500 years, ordinary people were forbidden from even looking at it. One glimpse could cost you your life. This is the story of the Yongle Emperor, the man who built this impossible dream. This is the story of power so absolute that it created a prison of gold. This is the story of love, betrayal, ambition, and secrets that still echo through those ancient halls today. After listening to this, you will understand why they called it forbidden, and why even now, after all these centuries, this place holds mysteries that no one has fully uncovered. And this is not just a history lesson. This is a perfect story for your English listening practice. So sit back, relax, and let me take you on a journey back in time, a journey into the heart of imperial China, where one man's vision created something that still stands as the largest palace complex in the world, a journey into the Forbidden City. The beginning, a prince who should never have been emperor. Now, let's begin. To understand the Forbidden City, we must go back in time to the year 1402. Imagine China during the Ming Dynasty. The empire is vast, stretching from the deserts in the north to the tropical forests in the south. The land is rich with silk, tea, and jade, but the empire is in chaos. The Hongwu Emperor has died, and his grandson, the young Jianwen Emperor, sits on the dragon throne. But there is a problem, a big problem. One of the late emperor's sons refuses to accept this. His name is Zhu Di, the Prince of Yan, and he believes the throne should be his. Zhu Di is not an ordinary prince. He is a warrior, a strategist, a man who has spent years fighting the Mongols on China's northern borders. He is tall, strong, with fierce eyes that make men tremble. He has led armies since he was a teenager. He knows war. He knows power. And he knows that his nephew, the young emperor, is weak. For 3 years, uncle and nephew fight a brutal civil war. Cities burn, armies clash, thousands die. The empire bleeds. And then, in 1402, Zhu Di does the unthinkable. He marches his army into Nanjing, the capital city. The imperial palace is set on fire. In the chaos, the young Jianwen emperor disappeared. Some say he died in the flames. Others whisper that he escaped, disguised as a Buddhist monk, and lived in hiding for the rest of his life. No one knows the truth. It remains one of China's greatest mysteries. But what is certain is this: Zhu Di took the throne. He became the Yongle Emperor, meaning perpetual happiness. But his happiness was built on blood, on betrayal, on the bodies of those who opposed him, and he knew it. The new emperor had a problem. Nanjing, the capital, reminded everyone of the civil war. The people whispered about the missing emperor. They questioned Yongle's right to rule. The palace felt haunted by the ghosts of his crimes. He could not sleep peacefully there. He could not rule from a place that doubted him. And so Yang Lei made a decision that would change China forever. He would move the capital. He would build a new city in the north, in Beijing, where he had been a prince. And at the heart of this new city, he would build a palace so magnificent, so powerful, so perfect that the entire world would bow before it. This palace would not just be a home, it would be a statement, a declaration that he was the true Son of Heaven, chosen by the gods themselves to rule all under heaven. This palace would be the center of the universe, and it would last for 10,000 years. This was the birth of the Forbidden City. The vision, building the impossible. In 1406, Emperor Yang Lei gave the order. He said, "Build me a palace that the world has never seen. Build me a palace worthy of the gods." But this was not just any construction project. This was the largest building project in human history up to that point. The emperor wanted perfection, and perfection came at a terrible price. First, they needed materials, not ordinary materials, but the finest in the empire. The emperor sent thousands of workers into the forests of southwest China to find the perfect trees. Not just any trees, but massive Nanmu trees, some over 1,000 years old. These trees were so large that it took hundreds of men just to move one trunk. Many workers died in these forests, crushed by falling trees or lost in the wilderness. Then they needed stone, not just any stone, but marble from quarries hundreds of miles away. The largest marble slab in the Forbidden City weighs over 200 tons. How did they move it? In winter, workers would create ice roads. They would pour water on the ground, let it freeze, and then drag the massive stones across the ice using logs as rollers. One single stone could take 20,000 workers and 28 days to transport.
They needed bricks, special bricks that could last for centuries. Workers created golden bricks by soaking clay for months, then firing them in kilns for 40 days straight. Each brick was tested by dropping it on the ground. If it rang like a bell, it was perfect. If not, it was thrown away. Millions of these bricks were made. They needed tiles, not ordinary tiles, but yellow glazed tiles that shimmered like gold in the sunlight. Yellow was the imperial color, the color of the emperor, and only the emperor's buildings could have yellow roofs. The technology to create these tiles was a closely guarded secret. Even today, we are not completely sure how they achieved that perfect golden yellow color. The scale was unimaginable. Over 1 million workers were brought to Beijing. Craftsmen, artists, carpenters, stonemasons, painters, glaziers, the finest talents from across the empire. Prisoners were forced to work until they died. Soldiers were stationed to ensure no one escaped or sabotaged the work. For 14 years, day and night, these workers built. The sound of hammers, saws, and chisels never stopped. The sky was filled with dust and smoke from the kilns. The city of Beijing transformed into a massive construction site, and in the center of it all, slowly rising like a mountain, was the Forbidden City. By 1420, it was complete. What they had created was beyond imagination. The Forbidden City covered 180 acres. It had 980 buildings with 9,999 rooms. Why 9,999? Because in Chinese tradition, only heaven could have 10,000 rooms. The emperor, though the son of heaven, had to show humility before the gods. The complex was surrounded by a 26-foot-high wall and a moat that was 170 feet wide. No one could enter without permission. No one could see inside without permission. It was a city within a city, completely cut off from the world outside. The entire palace was designed according to ancient Chinese cosmology. Every building, every gate, every courtyard was positioned to align with the principles of feng shui and the mandate of heaven. The north-south axis represented the connection between earth and heaven. The emperor's throne was placed at the exact center, the axis mundi, the pivot point of the entire universe. When it was finished, Emperor Yongle stood in the Hall of Supreme Harmony, the largest wooden building in all of China, and looked upon his creation. He had done it. He had built the impossible. He had created a palace that would make everyone forget about Nanjing, forget about the Civil War, forget about his bloody rise to power. The Forbidden City was complete, and for the next 500 years, it would be the heart of the Chinese Empire, the home of 24 emperors, and the stage for some of the most dramatic, tragic, and shocking stories in human history. The Golden Cage, life inside the Forbidden City. But here's what most people don't understand about the Forbidden City. It was not just a palace, it was a prison, a beautiful, golden prison. Let me explain. When an emperor was born inside the Forbidden City, he would live his entire life within those walls. From birth to death, he might never leave. Some emperors never saw the outside world. They never walked on a public street. They never spoke to a common person. They never knew what life was like beyond the red walls. The emperor was the most powerful man in China, perhaps in the world. He controlled an empire of hundreds of millions of people. His word was law. One gesture from his hand could start a war or bring peace. He could grant life or order death with a single sentence. He was worshipped as a living god, the son of heaven. But he was also the most isolated, the most watched, the most controlled person in the entire empire. Every moment of the emperor's day was planned. When he woke up, officials were there. When he ate, servants were there. When he dressed, attendants were there. When he studied, tutors were there. When he went to the bathroom, eunuchs were there. He was never, ever alone. Even his personal life was controlled. The emperor did not choose his own wife. His empress was selected by his mother and the court officials based on political considerations. His concubines were chosen from thousands of young girls brought to the palace from across the empire. These girls, some as young as 13, would be examined, tested, and ranked. Only the most beautiful, the most educated, the most graceful would enter the emperor's harem. And here's where the story becomes even more complex. The Forbidden City was home to 3 types of people: the imperial family, the concubines, and the eunuchs. Let's talk about the concubines first. At any given time, there could be thousands of women living in the inner court of the Forbidden City. They lived in a world of unimaginable luxury, but also unimaginable competition and danger. Why? Because every concubine had one goal: to sleep with the emperor and give birth to a son. If she could do this, she would rise in rank, gain power, and secure her future. If she failed, she would spend the rest of her life as a forgotten woman in a forgotten corner of the palace. The competition was brutal. Concubines would poison each other's food. They would spread rumors. They would form secret alliances. They would do anything to get the emperor's attention. Some succeeded, most did not. Many would go mad from the isolation and the endless waiting. Others would die young, their names forgotten by history. Then there were the eunuchs. The Forbidden City was home to over 70,000 eunuchs at its peak. These were men who had been castrated, who had given up their manhood to serve the emperor. Why would anyone do this? Because for a poor family, having a son become a eunuch in the imperial palace was the only way to escape poverty. Eunuchs could gain power, wealth, and influence in ways that ordinary people never could.
But the price was terrible. The castration procedure was brutal, and many died from infection. Those who survived were forever changed, forever incomplete. They were looked down upon by society, considered less than men. And yet, inside the Forbidden City, they were essential. Only eunuchs could serve in the inner court, where the emperor's women lived. Only eunuchs could be trusted not to have inappropriate relationships with the concubines. Some eunuchs rose to incredible power. They became the emperor's closest advisors, his most trusted servants. They controlled access to the emperor. If you wanted to speak to the emperor, you had to go through the eunuchs first. They read his documents, delivered his orders, and sometimes they even made decisions in his name. This created a dangerous situation. In several periods of Chinese history, eunuchs became more powerful than the emperor himself. They manipulated young emperors, controlled the government, and caused terrible corruption. The most infamous example was Wei Zhangshen during the late Ming dynasty. This eunuch became so powerful that he had statues of himself built in temples, as if he were a god. He had his enemies tortured and killed. He controlled the entire government, while the emperor, a young man named Tian Qi, spent his days building furniture and playing with his carpentry tools, completely unaware that his empire was falling apart. This was the reality of the Forbidden City. It was a place of absolute power and absolute powerlessness. The emperor ruled the world but was a prisoner of tradition. The concubines lived in luxury but were slaves to their circumstances. The eunuchs had influence but had sacrificed their very humanity to get it. It was a golden cage, beautiful on the outside, but inside it was filled with intrigue, betrayal, loneliness, and despair. The dark secrets, what they don't tell you. Now here's where the story takes a darker turn, because the Forbidden City holds secrets, secrets that were buried for centuries, secrets that even today make historians uncomfortable. Let me tell you about some of the most shocking things that happened behind those red walls. First, there was the practice of palace purges. When a new emperor took the throne, especially if he was young and his mother was the power behind the throne, she would often order the execution of all the previous emperor's favorite concubines. Why? To prevent any of them from having influence over the new emperor. These women, who had lived their entire lives in the palace, who had served the old emperor faithfully, would be taken to a courtyard, given white silk scarves, and told to hang themselves. If they refused, guards would do it for them. Hundreds of women could die in a single day. Then there was the Selection of Beautiful Women ceremony that happened every 3 years. Officials would go to the provinces and examine girls between 13 and 16 years old. They would measure their height, the length of their fingers, the sound of their voice, even the smell of their skin. The most beautiful would be brought to Beijing. Their families would cry with joy because it was such an honor. But these girls would never see their families again. They entered the Forbidden City, and for most of them, that was where they would die, decades later, without ever having lived a real life. There was also the tragedy of infant mortality. Because of the intense competition between concubines, infant princes and princesses would sometimes mysteriously die. Historians believe that rival concubines would have eunuchs smother babies while they slept, or poison their milk. The emperor often never knew the truth. He would mourn his child, never knowing it was murdered by someone within his own palace. And then there's the most disturbing secret of all. What happened to the concubines when an emperor died? In the early Ming dynasty, there was a terrible tradition called shenzong, or following in death. When an emperor died, some of his concubines would be buried alive with him. They would be given poisoned wine or forced into the tomb, so they could serve the emperor in the afterlife. This practice was eventually abolished, but not before hundreds of women were sacrificed this way. But perhaps the saddest secret of the Forbidden City is this. It was a place where love was almost impossible. Real love, the kind that ordinary people take for granted, was incredibly rare within those walls. Marriages were political, relationships were transactional. Even the bond between mother and child was complicated by court politics. Emperors could not trust their own brothers, who might try to steal the throne. Concubines could not trust each other because they were all competing for the same prize. Eunuchs could not have families of their own. Everyone in the Forbidden City was alone, surrounded by thousands of people, but utterly, completely alone. The last emperor, the end of an era. For nearly 500 years, the Forbidden City stood as the ultimate symbol of Chinese imperial power. 24 emperors of the Ming and Qing dynasties lived there, ruled there, and died there. But nothing lasts forever. and the story of how the Forbidden City's reign ended is both tragic and fascinating. Let me tell you about Puyi, the last emperor of China. In 1908, a 2-year-old boy was taken from his mother's arms in the middle of the night. He was brought to the Forbidden City, placed on the dragon throne, and told he was now the emperor of 400 million people. He cried. He was too young to understand what was happening. He just wanted his mother. This child was Puyi, and he would become the last person to ever sit on that throne. Puyi never really ruled. At 2, he was just a pawn in the hands of powerful officials and his own family. 3 years later, in 1911, the Xinhai Revolution swept across China. The Qing dynasty fell. The imperial system that had lasted for over 2,000 years came to an end. The Republic of China was born. But here's the strange thing. Puyi was allowed to keep living in the Forbidden City. The new government made an agreement with the imperial family. Puyi could keep his title and continue living in the inner court of the palace. He would still be treated as an emperor, with servants and eunuchs and concubines, but only within those walls. To the outside world, he was just a historical relic, a child playing emperor in a giant museum.
For 13 more years, Puyi lived this bizarre half-life. He studied with Western tutors who taught him English. He wore Western suits sometimes and traditional dragon robes other times. He watched movies and listened to jazz records. He married a beautiful woman named Wanrong, who became his empress. But he had no real power, no real purpose. He was an emperor of nothing, a king of an empty palace. And then, in 1924, a warlord named Feng Yusheng marched into Beijing and expelled Puyi from the Forbidden City. After 500 years, the last emperor was forced to leave. He was 18 years old. For the first time in his life, he had to live in the real world. What happened next was even more tragic. Puyi became a puppet of the Japanese. They made him the Emperor of Manchukuo, a puppet state in northeastern China. After World War II ended, he was captured by the Soviet Union, imprisoned for years, and then returned to China, where he was sent to a re-education camp by the communist government. The man who had been born to be the Son of Heaven, who had been worshipped as a living god, spent years doing manual labor in a prison camp, learning about communist ideology, being humiliated, and reformed. In 1959, Puyi was pardoned. He spent his final years as an ordinary citizen of the People's Republic of China. He worked as a gardener. He lived in a small apartment. He wrote his autobiography, From Emperor to Citizen, which became an international bestseller. In 1967, at the age of 61, he died of kidney cancer in Beijing. The last emperor's life was a tragedy. He had been given everything and lost everything. He had never been free, not even for a single day of his life. He was a prisoner of history, a victim of circumstances beyond his control. And with his death, the story of the Forbidden City as an imperial palace truly ended. But the Forbidden City itself did not die. After Puyi was expelled in 1924, the palace was open to the public for the first time in its history. Ordinary people could finally walk through those gates that had been forbidden for 500 years. They could see the throne halls, the living quarters, the gardens. They could stand in the same places where emperors had once stood. During World War II, when Japan invaded China, many treasures from the Forbidden City were evacuated. Over 13,000 crates of the most valuable artifacts were packed up and moved south to keep them safe from the Japanese army. These treasures traveled thousands of miles across China during the war. Eventually, many of them ended up in Taiwan, where they remain today in the National Palace Museum. This is why there are actually 2 great collections of imperial Chinese art, one in Beijing's Forbidden City and one in Taiwan. This separation of the collection is still a sensitive political issue today. In 1949, when the Communist Party came to power under Mao Zedong, there was debate about what to do with the Forbidden City. Some radical voices wanted to demolish it completely.
They said it was a symbol of feudal oppression, of imperial tyranny, of everything the revolution was fighting against. They wanted to tear it down and build something new in its place. But wiser voices prevailed. They argued that the Forbidden City was not just the emperor's palace, it was a masterpiece of Chinese architecture, art, and culture. It belonged to the Chinese people, to all of humanity. It should be preserved as a museum, as a testament to China's long history. And so it was. The Forbidden City became the Palace Museum, one of the largest and most important museums in the world. Today, over 19 million people visit the Forbidden City every year. It is the most visited museum in the world. People come from every corner of the globe to walk through those ancient halls, to stand in those vast courtyards, to imagine what life was like when emperors ruled from here. But here's what most visitors don't realize. They are only seeing a fraction of what the Forbidden City truly is. The palace has 980 buildings and 9,999 rooms, remember? But only 20% of the palace is open to the public. The rest remains closed, hidden, off limits. Why? Because many areas are still being restored. Some buildings are in such fragile condition that allowing visitors inside would damage them. Other areas are used for storage of the millions of artifacts in the museum's collection. But there's something else, something that the museum doesn't advertise. Some areas of the Forbidden City are considered haunted. Yes, haunted. There are stories, whispered stories that the guards and workers tell each other but don't tell tourists. Stories of strange sounds heard at night, of figures seen in windows of buildings that are supposed to be empty, of cold spots in certain courtyards, of doors that open themselves, of a woman in white who walks through the imperial garden at midnight. The museum officially denies these stories, of course. They say it's superstition, imagination, nothing more. But they also don't deny that certain areas of the palace have a strange atmosphere, areas where people feel uncomfortable, areas where workers refuse to go alone after dark. Think about it. Over 500 years that the Forbidden City was an imperial palace, thousands of people died within its walls. Emperors, empresses, princes, princesses, concubines, eunuchs, servants. Some died naturally, many did not. There were executions, murders, suicides, assassinations. So much blood was spilled on those stones. So many lives ended in tragedy. Is it really so hard to believe that some of that pain, that suffering, that unfulfilled longing might linger in those ancient halls? And beyond ghost stories, the Forbidden City holds real mysteries that historians have never fully solved.
For example, there are the secret passages. Modern surveys using ground-penetrating radar have discovered that there are hidden corridors and rooms beneath the Forbidden City, tunnels that connect different parts of the palace, underground chambers whose purpose we don't understand. The imperial family knew about these passages and used them, but their exact layout was kept secret. Even today, we don't know where all of them are or where they lead. Then there's the question of what happened to all the treasures. The Forbidden City once held the greatest collection of art, jade, gold, and precious objects in the world. Thousands of years of Chinese imperial treasures all gathered in one place. But much of it is now missing. Yes, some went to Taiwan, some was stolen by foreign armies during the invasions of the 19th and early 20th centuries, some was looted during the chaos of the Civil War. But historians estimate that thousands of priceless objects simply vanished. Where did they go? Were they hidden, sold on the black market, destroyed? We may never know. And then there's the most intriguing mystery of all, the secret documents. The Qing dynasty kept meticulous records of everything that happened in the palace. Every meeting, every decision, every event was recorded by court historians. These records, called the veritable records, filled entire libraries. But when the dynasty fell, many of these documents disappeared. Some were destroyed, others were hidden.
Scholars believe that there are still caches of imperial documents hidden somewhere, possibly within the Forbidden City itself, containing secrets about the emperors, their decisions, their private lives, the true nature of palace intrigues. If these documents were ever found, they could rewrite what we know about Chinese history. The legacy. Why it still matters. So, why does the Forbidden City matter today? Why should we care about a palace built 600 years ago for emperors who are long dead? Because the Forbidden City is more than just a building. It is a symbol of human ambition, of what we can create when we pour all our resources, all our energy, all our devotion into a single vision. Think about it. Over 1 million workers spent 14 years building this palace. Thousands died in the process. The cost was staggering, so much money that it helped contribute to economic problems that would plague China for decades. And for what? To create a home for one man, the emperor, and his household. Was it worth it? That's the question that makes the Forbidden City so fascinating. From one perspective, it was a terrible waste. All that labor, all that wealth, all that suffering just to satisfy the ego of emperors who lived in isolated luxury while their people struggled. But from another perspective, the Forbidden City is a testament to human greatness. It shows what we are capable of when we refuse to accept limits. The craftsmen who worked on this palace didn't just build buildings, they created art. The wooden structures, the painted ceilings, the carved marble, the glazed tiles, every element is a masterpiece. The engineering required to create a complex this large without modern technology was remarkable. The attention to detail, the pursuit of perfection, the unwillingness to compromise, these are qualities we still admire today. And perhaps most importantly, the Forbidden City is a reminder of history. It connects us to the past in a tangible way. When you walk through those courtyards, when you stand in the Hall of Supreme Harmony, when you touch those ancient stones, you are touching the same surfaces that emperors touched. You are breathing the same air that empresses breathed. You are standing where history was made. In an age when everything is new, when buildings are torn down and replaced every few decades, when nothing seems permanent, the Forbidden City reminds us that some things can last, that some things should last, that we have a responsibility to preserve the best of what previous generations created, even if we don't agree with everything they stood for. The emperors are gone. The empire is gone. The system that created the Forbidden City is gone. But the palace remains. And it will remain for generations to come, standing there in the heart of Beijing, silent and mysterious, holding its secrets close, reminding us of a time when emperors ruled as gods and palaces were built to last for 10,000 years. The final truth. Let me tell you the final truth about the Forbidden City, the one that brings everything together. The Forbidden City was built on a contradiction. It was the most public building in China, the seat of government, the center of power, the place where decisions were made that affected hundreds of millions of lives. And yet it was also the most private place in China, a place where ordinary people were forbidden to enter, where everything that happened inside was kept secret, where the emperor lived isolated from the very people he ruled. This contradiction defined everything about the palace and the empire it represented. The emperor was supposed to be the son of heaven, the connection between heaven and earth, between the gods and the people. But how could he serve his people when he never met them? How could he understand their struggles when he lived in luxury? How could he rule wisely when he was surrounded by people who told him only what he wanted to hear? In the end, this contradiction destroyed the empire. The Qing dynasty fell not because of foreign invasion, not because of economic collapse, but because the system had become so disconnected from reality that it could no longer adapt to the modern world. The emperors in the Forbidden City made decisions based on tradition, on ancient texts, on the advice of officials who had never left the palace walls. Meanwhile, the world outside was changing rapidly. New technologies, new ideas, new forms of government were emerging, and the empire could not keep up. When the last emperor was expelled from the Forbidden City in 1924, it wasn't just the end of a dynasty, it was the end of a worldview. The idea that one man could rule by divine right, that tradition was more important than progress, that isolation from the world was somehow noble, all of these ideas died with the imperial system. And yet, the palace stands. The Forbidden City outlived the emperors. It outlived the system that created it. It has transformed from a symbol of isolated power to a symbol of shared heritage. What was once forbidden to all but a select few is now open to millions. That transformation is perhaps the most powerful lesson the Forbidden City can teach us. Nothing lasts forever. Empires rise and fall. Systems that seem eternal collapse. Power that seems absolute proves to be fragile, but beauty endures, art endures, culture endures. The stones and timbers of the Forbidden City have outlasted all the emperors who commanded their construction. Today, when you visit the Forbidden City, you can stand in the same spot where the Yongle Emperor stood 600 years ago when his impossible dream was finally complete. You can walk through the same gates where concubines once plotted against each other. You can touch the same railings that eunuchs once polished daily. You can look up at the same sky that Pu Yi saw when he was expelled, ending 500 years of imperial history. And if you close your eyes and listen carefully, perhaps you can still hear the echoes. The chanting of court ceremonies, the whispers of secret conversations, the tears of concubines who would never see their families again, the footsteps of emperors pacing through midnight gardens, burdened by the weight of ruling an empire they could never truly understand. The Forbidden City is a monument to ambition and isolation, to power and loneliness, to human greatness and human folly. It is one of the most magnificent creations in human history, built at a cost we can barely imagine, for a purpose that ultimately failed. And yet, it endures. It stands there still in the heart of Beijing, a mystery partially solved but never fully understood, a symbol that means different things to different people, a place that was once forbidden but is now open to the world. This is the Forbidden City, this is its story, and this is why it will live forever.